When he's going into that like tilt and hip slide, he kind of gets stuck in the mud, can't really rotate his chest back, and that starts to kind of build in with, say, components that are going to tend to get too steep on the ball, cut the ball, get the arm plane too high, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, so Steve, we're looking at a gentleman that you had a lesson with recently, and we're just kind of talking about, this is the before and after we've got here, just to show the guys at home, first of all, the differences in just a short period of time of working on something that had a huge effect on his outcome. He was hitting it so much better, the ball was flying with a much more penetrating flight with less curvature. Let's talk about some of the movements in the body, specifically pertaining to the lower body that you identified here.
Yeah, so obviously left screen being his original one, we often see with this kind of pattern the centers, lower center, we just say from say middle of the belt buckle, upper center, just say center of the torso, don't really line up very well at P1 at the setup position. So in this case, his upper center is more forward of his lower center, and not that this is 100% rule, but we'll often see, let's say, poor motion from there. A lot of hip slide, upper center will kind of start to tilt left. So that's something I'm always looking for, is to try and get that upper torso, upper center slightly behind the lower. At least that kind of gives us a running start. Essentially the head being a little bit more behind, where the ball would be. Hip position's probably going to be feeling more forward, we'll say 60-40, and that kind of gives us, again, a running start of how we want the body to move.
Yeah, so I've just drawn a vertical line up through the center line of the body here, just as a reference to show the guys at home how much of the upper body, and specifically his head, is in front of that line relative to what you've got over there on the right hand side there. So now moving on from this position here, we can see some subtleties in the setup in regards to sort of handle position. We can see that the handle itself is a little bit further forward over there on the right hand side than the left. Looks like the grip's a little bit stronger as well. Okay. Now moving on from there, in regards to his motion, let's talk us through that.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on that point, the main reason we have the handle forward, maybe the ball's back one, the grip condition's a little bit more rotated, is he was hitting a little bit of an open face cut before. So we're kind of just working on some like small pieces that just kind of move away from that that pattern. And obviously with grip, handle forward, like that tends to hit it's more down and out on the golf ball. That's why we kind of went with that one.
Okay, so now moving on to the body movement, we've got a circle around the head and one up the trail side. Over here on the left hand side, as this guy was moving off the ball, talk us through this here.
Yeah, so what we see really noticeable is how much the head drops. And we see how much the kind of left side kind of caves in, which causes that right hip to get really, really high. So it's a very, very common pattern. Look, to me, it's a combination of poor concepts. Often the players trying to keep their head very fixed on the ball. They're not starting in an optimal position, and all of a sudden they get this kind of like huge dip. Or it could just purely be, the movement pattern that they've fallen into the habit of. But the way I would describe it is way too much left tilt. That's what causes the dropping component, and way too much like hip slide, which obviously gets the pressure moving way too far outside, but the upper center sort of starts to like fall to the left, fall down to the left. So it gets really, really tough to get back to the ball from that position with regards to how the lower body and upper body's moving.
Yeah, for sure. We can see over here on the right hand side, by about the lead arm parallel position, we can see that his hips have turned much more in a circle. They're very close up against the line, which is within reason what we'd like to see here, and the head certainly hasn't dipped nearly as much. Yeah,
and if we did a line from, let's say, lead shoulder straight across to the trail shoulder, we can see how much more rotated he is relative to that position. So I'd call that about 60 to 70 degrees of upper body rotation, torso rotation if you like, compared to maybe like 40. So when he's going into that like tilt and hip slide, he kind of gets stuck in the mud, can't really rotate his chest back, and that starts to kind of build in with, say, components that are going to tend to get too steep on the ball, cut the ball, get the arm plane too high, all that sort of stuff.
So walk us through this. This gentleman here was pulling the hips, going into too much left side bend too early, left knee was caving in, real exaggerated into this position here, okay? Not only that, we can start to feel that the back's about to give way when we do this motion. For all of you who are struggling with your back problems, there's a good chance that you might be doing something like this as well. So from here, we noticed in the after video, he was actually a lot more like this, wasn't he? His hips were a lot more forward. and his head certainly was staying within the boundaries of its initial position.
To actually feel like the club head in this point, like the shaft kind of stays stuck in the ground, and the first move is actually like an upward movement. So the left shoulder actually feels like it goes up and away, and the left side stays high. Now, that certainly is going to look quite exaggerated just as a standalone, but as a feel for him, it was kind of like this way, and this way was actually his first move. That's what we were trying to get him to do. And from there, he could actually go into rotation and be in a pretty good position.
Great. So just do that once more for me. So set up to it and make that initial move that you were just doing. So you're feeling that the golf club is feeling like it's stuck in the ground, and then you're feeling like the lead shoulder is actually getting quite high quite early. Now, this in itself would be an error that sometimes we see other players make. But because this gentleman was doing the opposite, where he was actually going in way too much left side bend and struggling from there, well, we can see that as you move into this position, it's very different, especially as you continue back with how that trail hip's moving and then how that upper body has rotated to the top.
Correct.
Now, I'm sure throughout this process, he stated that he felt extremely tall at the top.
I feel like it was lifting up, felt like his head was like moving way up and off the ball. And to be fair, that's actually what he was doing when he was doing his drill. That's actually what I wanted him to feel. I wanted him to feel like he was kind of like a little bit crazy. His left hip went up, left shoulder went up, head felt like it kind of come off the ball, so it was almost like doing that. But yeah, as we know, it starts to kind of equalize when we get a club. It equalizes more when we get a ball. Everything starts to kind of normalize and kind of looks like a pretty like standard looking backswing. That emotion.
How long did it take for him to establish a feel that he was able to then game and hit?
So we worked on some different things, but that was probably our third session that we had, our third full swing session. He's a good shooter to work with, and he was able to recreate that with a club. He was able to piece that together, like hitting a ball. He actually had some downswing stuff that we had to tackle as well, so it wasn't all backswing. So yeah, definitely helps when you've got a good student that's pretty responsive. And they can also move pretty well. You're dealing with more just the movement and not maybe some physical limitations.
Yeah, and as we can see through the video there in the analysis, such a huge difference between the after and the before. And that's something key to note, and that resulted in much better ball striking as well. So just for the guys at home, we'll run through that a couple of times while I'll do it. So I'll get you to just give me the feeling setting up. So instead of going in and down and across like that, I'm feeling like this lead shoulder here.
Yeah, and I might even do something like this with a club. So I'm going to get you to go this way first. So your left hip feels like it stays up and almost a little bit forward towards my hand. Good. And then from there, we're just going to fling the club straight over the trackman there. As you go into like, almost what I would call like an upwards rotation, or more of a level rotation versus that dipping one.
Yeah, and we often see that there isn't much of a disassociation between a lot of players' upper body and lower body. And when they're all turning at the same time, it really creates this unstable sequence, which is not consistent. They certainly can't play when they get to undulating lies or where balance is of a premium. So this feeling here as we do so, club staying in the ground, and I feel like my hips are going forward, lead shoulders going high, that gets me feeling like my upper body is actually rotating significantly earlier than what this lower body is doing. Earlier and more, absolutely. All right, so I'm going to do a couple of reps of that, getting a feeling of how he would go about that, and then feel like you said, flinging the golf club into that backswing position. Actually feels like something that I need a little bit of in my swing. Now from here, we'll hit one, recreate that feel. Felt tall, felt powerful. I loved it. Good stuff.